The holographic display in the Galactic Council chamber flickered with the final transmission from Proxima Colony. Ambassador Nari sat frozen in her seat, unable to look away from the horror unfolding on the screen. The Krell warships hung in the sky above the colony like dark predators, their weapons charging with an eerie blue glow. She had visited Proxima Colony just 3 months ago. She remembered the children playing in the Central Park, laughing as they chased each other under the artificial sun. She remembered the farmers showing her their harvest, proud of food they were growing on this distant world. She remembered the teachers, the doctors, the engineers, all building a new life so far from Earth. Now she watched them die. The Krell plasma cannons fired in perfect synchronization. The domed cities that had taken decades to build melted like ice under a blowtorch. The screams on the transmission lasted only seconds before the communication array was vaporized. 40 million souls, gone in minutes. The display went dark, showing only static where a thriving human settlement had existed moments before. Nari's stomach churned. Her hands gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Around her, other alien ambassadors gasped and murmured, but their shock felt distant, abstract. They hadn't lost 40 million of their people. They didn't understand. The static cleared, and the Krell High Commander's face appeared on every screen in human space. His scales gleamed under harsh lighting, and his eyes, cold reptilian eyes, stared out with absolute confidence. Humanity will surrender systems 447 through 523, or more colonies will burn, he announced, his voice echoing through every human communication channel across the galaxy. You have 24 hours to comply. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. The chamber erupted in chaos. Alien counselors shouted over each other, some calling for sanctions, others for military intervention, most simply expressing shock at the brutality they had witnessed. Nari's hands trembled as she pulled out her secure tablet and input her security codes. Her fingers moved automatically, following protocols she had hoped never to use. The message she sent was simple, direct, and had been prepared years ago for exactly this scenario. Within the hour, every human embassy across the galaxy received the same directive. Evacuate immediately. No explanations. No negotiations. No goodbyes. She watched her screen as confirmations came flooding in. Earth Embassy on Velan Prime. Evacuating. Mars Consulate on Pylar Station. Evacuating. Lunar Trade Office on the Thrain homeworld. Evacuating. One by one, humanity was pulling back in the galaxy like a wounded animal retreating to its den. The Galactic Council chamber grew quiet as everyone noticed the humans preparing to leave. Ambassador Hyun, Earth's senior representative, stood slowly from his seat. He was a veteran diplomat, a man who had spent 30 years building bridges between humanity and the galaxy. Nari had seen him negotiate peace treaties, trade agreements, cultural exchanges. He had always smiled, always found common ground, always believed in cooperation. Now his face was stone. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with ambassadors he had once called friends. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and absolutely final. The Republic of Earth hereby suspends all diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council and all member species. Maintain distance from human territory. This is not a request. Then he walked out. His staff followed in perfect silence, their footsteps echoing through the stunned chamber. Nari gathered her materials and joined the exodus. No one tried to stop them. No one knew what to say. Behind her, she heard the Krell delegate laugh. Cowards, he hissed to his companions. Humanity shows its true nature. They talk of peace and cooperation, but when faced with real power, they flee like insects. But Jay, the elderly ambassador from Thrain, suddenly rose from his seat. His 4 arms were shaking, and his usually calm face had gone pale. Well, as pale as his blue-tinged skin could go. We need to evacuate the border systems, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Now, immediately. A Pylar counselor laughed nervously. They're retreating. Why would we need to? Because you've never seen humans go silent before, Jay interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire chamber. I have. 50 years ago, we had a small border dispute with humanity. A few mining stations. 500 casualties. Mostly theirs. They went silent for 3 days. He paused, and Nari saw genuine fear in his ancient eyes. When they came back, Jay continued, they brought weapons we had never seen before. Ships that moved faster than our sensors could track. Our fleet was destroyed in hours. We surrendered immediately, and they were merciful. But that was over a minor territorial dispute. He turned to look at the Krell delegate. You just murdered 40 million of them. 40 million. You have no idea what you've unleashed. The Krell delegate waved dismissively, but Nari noticed his hand was trembling slightly. By nightfall, every human vessel in neutral space had vanished. Trading ships that had been docked at alien stations for months suddenly departed without warning. Scientific expeditions in joint research zones packed up their equipment and left. Even the ancient Generation ship that had been serving as a cultural museum in the Velan system activated its engines for the first time in centuries and began the long journey home. Every diplomatic channel went dead. No responses to emergency messages. No acknowledgments of calls. The Galactic Communication Network showed human space as a dark void on all frequencies. The constant background chatter of human civilian broadcasts, their music, their entertainment shows, their news programs, all of it ceased. Even Earth itself went dark. The blue planet that had been a beacon of radio signals for centuries suddenly fell silent. Earth had gone silent. And those who knew humanity's history, who remembered the old wars, who understood what humans were capable of when they stopped talking and started calculating, they felt their blood run cold. Admiral Taeyong stood before the Strategic Command Council, his uniform crisp and perfectly pressed despite the fact that he hadn't slept in 60 hours. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his posture remained military straight. Behind him, massive holographic projections filled the war room, showing Earth's industrial sectors glowing like stars. The heat signatures were so intense they should have been impossible. Forge worlds that normally operated at careful, sustainable levels were now burning white-hot on the sensors. All Forge worlds report operational status at 310%, Commander Sora announced, her voice steady despite the exhaustion visible on her face. She pulled up detailed readouts on the displays. Mars foundries are running 24-hour shifts with no breaks. The lunar manufacturing complexes have converted every civilian factory to military production. We've recalled every engineer, every technician, every factory worker from leave. She paused, scrolling through more data. Asteroid mining operations have exceeded safety limits by factors of 8. We're stripping the belt bare, taking everything iron, nickel, platinum, rare earths. The mining unions have suspended all safety protocols voluntarily. They're working in conditions that would normally be illegal, and they're doing it willingly. Another officer spoke up, his voice grim. Food production has been rationed. Every non-essential industry has been shut down. We're converting civilian shipyards, orbital construction platforms, even deep space research stations into weapons manufacturing. Everything we have is going into the war machine. President Day's face appeared on the main screen, broadcasting from the deep bunker beneath Seoul. The president looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 3 days. His eyes were hollow, sunken into his skull. Dark circles made him look almost like a ghost. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. How long until we're ready? He asked. Admiral Taeyong consulted his tablet, running through calculations one more time. 6 weeks to optimal combat readiness. Sir, we can launch in 4 if necessary, though we be operating at 85% of maximum capability. President Day was quiet for a long moment. In the background, they could hear the muted sounds of the command bunker, keyboards clicking, officers murmuring, the constant low hum of computer systems processing impossible amounts of data. When the president spoke again, his voice was ice cold. Make it 3 weeks. Sir, that will mean... I know what it means, Admiral. Double shifts, triple shifts. Push everything beyond the red line. I don't care if our forges burn out and need to be rebuilt afterward. I don't care if we strip every asteroid in the belt down to dust. Make it 3 weeks. The president leaned forward, and for a moment, The camera caught the full intensity of his expression. 40 million of our people are dead. The Krell are celebrating. They think they've won. I want them to understand exactly how wrong they are. Yes, sir, Taeyong replied. 3 weeks. Across the galaxy, intelligence officers were beginning to realize something was very, very wrong. While the Krell celebrated their victory and prepared their grand fleet to strike at Earth itself, others were watching the sensors with growing dread. The Velan Compact maintained the best intelligence network in the galaxy. Their long-range sensors could detect energy signatures from halfway across known space. What they were seeing from human territory made no sense whatsoever. Every human world was lit up like a miniature sun. Energy consumption had skyrocketed to levels that suggested either catastrophic failures or total industrial mobilization. Massive cargo haulers that normally transported food and consumer goods were now carrying raw materials from the outer colonies to the core worlds. The traffic patterns had completely changed, everything flowing inward toward the forges. Counselor Mira of the Velan Compact called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. She stood before the assembled ambassadors, her tentacles writhing with barely contained anxiety. My analysts have been monitoring human space since the silence began, she said, her voice tight. What we're seeing is unprecedented. Human industrial output has reached levels we've only ever recorded in species facing complete extinction, species fighting for their very survival. She pulled up comparison charts. This is the Thrain Collective during the Plague Wars, when they thought their entire species would be wiped out. This is the Pylar during the Swarm Invasion, when they mobilized every resource to survive. And this, she highlighted the current readings from human space. This exceeds both of them. They're not retreating, Mira continued, her voice rising. They're mobilizing. Every forge, every factory, every construction yard is operating at impossible levels. They're building something, a lot of something. The Krell delegate, a younger officer who had replaced the previous representative, stood up dismissively. For what purpose? He demanded, his scales rippling with amusement. They lost 3 colonies, a handful of settlements. They should be suing for peace, begging us to stop. Instead, they hide in their space and build toys. Jay, the elderly Thrain ambassador, slowly rose from his seat. He looked even older than before, his forearms trembling slightly as he activated a holographic display. I want to show you all something, he said quietly. This is classified footage from 50 years ago. The Thrain-Human Border War. The display filled with combat footage. It showed the beginning of the conflict, a small skirmish over mining rights to an asteroid field. The Thrain fleet had engaged 3 human ships. The humans lost 500 casualties, mostly human, a minor incident by galactic standards. We thought we had won, Jay said softly. Then humanity went silent. For 3 days, we heard nothing. No communications, no diplomatic overtures, no surrender, just silence. The footage shifted. It showed human ships returning, but they looked nothing like the vessels that had fought in the initial skirmish. These were new designs, built in just 3 days. Sleek, deadly, covered in weapon systems that shouldn't have been possible to manufacture so quickly. The council watched in stunned silence as the footage showed what happened next. Human weapons tore through Thrain shields like they weren't even there. Cruisers that had been pride of the Thrain fleet melted like candles under blowtorches. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than an hour. We sued for peace immediately, Jay continued, his voice barely above a whisper. We surrendered everything they asked for. They were merciful. They accepted our surrender and withdrew. But that was over a mining dispute. A tiny border skirmish. 500 casualties. He turned to look directly at the Krell delegate, and there was genuine pity in his ancient eyes. You murdered 40 million humans. 40 million. You didn't destroy military targets. You didn't attack their fleet. You burned civilians. You killed their children. And you broadcast across their networks to humiliate them. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the Krell delegate had stopped smiling. Do you have any concept of what's coming for you? Jay asked softly. The Krell delegate's scales rippled with forced confidence. "We have the largest fleet in the galaxy, 3,000 warships." "We?" "You had the largest fleet," Jay corrected quietly, emphasizing the past tense. "I suspect in a few weeks, you won't have a fleet at all." Una was 17 when the Proxima Colony burned. She had been in her final year of school on Earth, preparing for university exams, when the news came through. Her parents had been teachers there. Her mother taught literature. Her father mathematics. They had moved to Proxima 5 years ago, excited about helping build humanity's future on a distant world. They had promised to visit Earth for her 18th birthday next month. Now they were gone, vaporized along with 40 million others. She remembered calling their apartment that day, getting no answer. Then the emergency broadcast started. Then the videos appeared. The Krell warships, the plasma fire, the domed cities melting. She had watched the screen in numb horror, searching desperately for any sign that her parents' district had survived. But there were no survivors. There was nothing left but ash and radiation. Now she stood in the massive assembly hall on Earth with 10 million other recruits. Most of them were young like her, teenagers who had lost everything. But there were older people too, grandparents who had lost their children and grandchildren, middle-aged workers who had lost spouses and siblings, all of them wearing the same expression of cold, determined rage. Fleet Admiral Jinho walked onto the stage. He was an older man, maybe 60, with gray hair and a weathered face. He didn't smile. He didn't try to inspire them with grand speeches or patriotic nonsense. When he spoke, his voice was simple and direct. "You've all lost someone," he said, his words echoing through the hall. "Family, friends, fellow citizens, people you loved. The Krell thought this would break us. They thought we would be so terrified, so devastated, that we would surrender anything that demanded just to avoid more pain." He paused, looking across the sea of faces. They were wrong. The screen behind him suddenly lit up with a single document. The heading was clear even from the back of the hall. Classified Silent Protocol. "This is our response to genocide." Jinho continued. "This doctrine has existed for over 200 years, since the darkest days of our history, when we nearly destroyed ourselves. We created it to ensure that if anyone ever targeted our civilians, if anyone ever committed mass murder against our people, we would have a clear, unified response." He gestured to the document behind him. "When enemies target our civilians, when they massacre our people for intimidation or conquest, we invoke this doctrine, total communication blackout. So our enemies cannot track our preparations, complete industrial mobilization, so every resource flows toward one goal, and one mission, one single objective, the absolute elimination of the threat." The hall was completely silent. Una felt her heartbeat in her chest. This was real. This was actually happening. "You're here because you volunteered," Jinho said. "Not one of you was drafted. Not one of you was forced. You came because you understand what needs to be done. The Krell will learn that humanity does not accept the murder of our people. They will learn permanently." Within hours of that speech, something impossible happened. A leaked copy of the Silent Protocol reached the Galactic Network. Someone, no one ever found out who, had sent a classified document to every major intelligence agency in the galaxy. Maybe it was intentional, meant as a warning. Maybe it was an accident. Either way, the galaxy was about to understand exactly what humanity was planning. Intelligence agencies across the galaxy scrambled to translate the document. The Velan analysts worked through the night. The Pilar code breakers pulled emergency shifts. Even the Krell Intelligence Division stopped celebrating long enough to read what had been sent. What they found chilled every military strategist who read it. The protocol was written in simple, bureaucratic language, the kind of dry military documentation that usually put people to sleep. But the content was absolutely terrifying. All rules of engagement suspended. The careful regulations that prevented excessive civilian casualties, that protected prisoners, that limited weapons, all gone. Humanity was removing every restriction it had placed on itself. All weapons restrictions lifted. The banned technologies, the outlawed weapon systems, the experimental designs that violated interstellar conventions. Everything was now authorized for use. All resource limitations removed. No budgets. No cost-benefit analysis. No questions about economic sustainability. Everything humanity had would be thrown into the war effort. Objective: total annihilation of aggressor military capability. Not negotiation. Not occupation. Not peace terms. Complete destruction of the enemy's ability to wage war. Duration: until objective complete or enemy extinct. That last line made intelligence officers across the galaxy go pale. There was no time limit, no exit strategy, no plan for what came after. Humanity would continue until the Krell military ceased to exist, or until the Krell species ceased to exist, whichever came first. An archived human documentary began circulating on the galactic networks. Someone had dug it up from Earth's historical archives and released it publicly. It showed historian Inha, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, speaking calmly into the camera about Earth's ancient wars. Humans have always had a capacity for what we call total war, she explained in the documentary, which had originally been made for a university course. Throughout our history, when we fought for survival, when our civilians were targeted, we didn't fight to win territory or gain resources. We fought to eliminate the enemy's ability to ever threaten us again, completely, permanently. The footage showed clips from humanity's old wars. Cities burning. Entire nations mobilizing every citizen. Factories converted to produce weapons day and night. The sheer scale of destruction humans had inflicted on themselves was staggering. And that was before they had access to plasma cannons and antimatter bombs. The galaxy watched the documentary in stunned silence and finally understood the terrible mistake the Krell had made. They hadn't just attacked a peaceful species. They had attacked a species that had been peaceful by choice, not by nature. And now that choice had been taken away. At the human border, new ships began appearing. They emerged from shipyards that had been working nonstop for 3 weeks, built in a frenzied rush that should have been impossible. These weren't the sleek exploration vessels or elegant civilian transports the galaxy was used to seeing from humanity. These were warships, pure and simple. Massive hulls covered in armor plating, weapons arrays that bristled from every surface. Brutal, utilitarian designs with no wasted space, no aesthetic considerations. They had been built for one purpose: to destroy. Each one bore a name painted in bold letters across its hull. Retribution. Never forget. 40 million. Proxima's vengeance. Justice. No mercy. The Krell High Commander watched the fleet approaching his border positions and smiled. His intelligence division had counted the ships. Humans had maybe 400 vessels. He had 1,200 waiting for them. They think they can frighten us with names, he told his bridge crew, his scaled face twisted in amusement. Emotional displays mean nothing in war. Numbers matter. And we have 3 times their numbers. Captain Sook sat in the command chair of the human flagship Righteous Fury, watching the Krell fleet arrange itself for battle. He opened a transmission on all Krell military frequencies. "You asked for our answer," he said calmly. "Here it is." The Battle of Krell's Edge lasted 4 hours. The history books would later call it battle, but that word was generous. What happened at the border that day was something else entirely. The Krell fleet was arranged in perfect formation. 1,200 warships, the pride of the Dominion, positioned in defensive layers with overlapping fields of fire. The Krell High Commander had planned this engagement carefully. His ships outnumbered the humans 3 to 1. His weapons had superior range. His shields were military-grade, built to withstand sustained bombardment. By every conventional calculation, the Krell should have won decisively. The Krell fleet ceased to exist in the first hour. Commander Hannah watched from her tactical station aboard Righteous Fury, her fingers moving across holographic controls as she coordinated targeting data. The first salvo from the human fleet lit up her screens with data that made no sense. The numbers couldn't be right. Plasma lances firing at 150% standard output, she reported, her voice mechanical, almost detached from the reality of what she was seeing. Target disintegration confirmed. No debris pattern forming. The Krell ships weren't just being destroyed. They were being vaporized so completely that they left no wreckage behind. Human weapons cut through their shields like tissue paper, through their armor like it was nothing. Where Krell cruisers had been moments before, there was only empty space and expanding clouds of superheated gas. A Krell destroyer tried to return fire. Its plasma bolt struck the human frigate, unwavering at full power. The shields flickered but held. The frigate didn't even slow down. It fired once, and the Krell destroyer simply ceased to exist. This wasn't a battle. This was systematic extermination. Hannah had trained for fleet combat her entire career. She had studied tactics, strategy, historical engagements. She knew what space warfare was supposed to look like: lengthy exchanges of fire, shield attrition, tactical maneuvering. This was nothing like that. The human ships moved through the Krell formations like reapers through wheat, and everywhere they went, Krell vessels died. The Krell High Commander tried to rally his forces, screaming orders across military channels. He repositioned his remaining ships, attempted to concentrate fire on single human vessels. Nothing worked. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, their weapons never missing, their shields holding against everything the Krell threw at them. Captain Sook gave a simple order: board the flagship. Human Marines breached the Krell command ship in 20 minutes. They moved to the corridors in powered armor, unstoppable, methodical. The Krell High Commander and his senior staff were captured alive, dragged to the bridge. Captain Sook's face appeared on every Krell military channel throughout their space. Every ship, every base, every military facility saw the same transmission. "You broadcast a murder of our people across our networks," he said, his voice absolutely calm. "You showed our children dying. You showed our cities burning. You wanted us to see, to feel helpless, to be afraid." The camera turned to show the Krell High Commander, his scales pale with terror, held between two human Marines. "Now watch as we answer," Sook said simply. The execution of the Krell High Command was broadcast on every Krell frequency, just as they had broadcast a massacre of Proxima Colony. The galaxy would later debate whether this was justice or revenge. But in that moment, humanity didn't care what anyone else thought. The human fleet didn't stop at the border. Krell commanders across their space began transmitting frantic surrender offers. They promised to withdraw from contested systems, to pay reparations, to accept any peace terms humanity wanted. Some abandoned their ships entirely, fleeing in escape pods. The human fleet ignored every surrender offer. They didn't respond to a single transmission. Admiral Taeyong divided his forces into 12 battle groups from his command ship. Each group received specific sector assignments. "All military installations are targets," he commanded, his voice broadcast to every human captain. "All shipyards, all fortress worlds, all weapons research facilities. Mark each one off the list. Methodically, completely." The battle group spread out across Krell space like a surgical instrument, precise and unstoppable. When the Velan Compact sent peacekeepers to negotiate, 36 ships carrying diplomats and mediators, they found human destroyers waiting at the border. Captain Miho, commanding the destroyer Iron Resolve, opened a channel before the Velan ships could even transmit their intentions. "Turn back," he said flatly. "Any vessel entering this theater will be destroyed. This is not a war. This is justice. Do not interfere." The Velan commander tried to argue. "We only want to prevent further bloodshed. Surely there can be a diplomatic." "Turn back now," Miho interrupted, "or we will fire. You have 30 seconds to begin your retreat." The peacekeepers withdrew. Word spread quickly. Humanity would not be stopped, not by allies, not by neutral parties, not by anyone. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session, their chambers filled with panicked voices. They had access to long-range sensors and watched helplessly as humanity dismantled the Krell Dominion piece by piece. Every military base was reduced to molten slag. Every warship that tried to fight was destroyed. Every weapons facility was obliterated. The humans moved from target to target with mechanical efficiency, checking items off a list. "They're not stopping," a counselor whispered, Watching sensor feeds show another Krell military station being reduced to debris. The Krell government has surrendered. They've offered everything. Why won't they stop? Jay, the old Thrain ambassador, sat heavily in his seat, his forearms folded across his chest. His voice was quiet, but carried through the chamber. The Krell government doesn't exist anymore. The humans dissolved it when they executed the High Command, and they're not accepting political surrender. They're not interested in terms or treaties or reparations. He pulled up a tactical map showing the human battle groups moving through Krell space. They're eliminating the threat permanently. Every ship, every weapon, every facility capable of producing military equipment. When they're finished, the Krell won't have the ability to threaten anyone ever again. Commander Sora stood on the bridge of Eternal Vigil as they approached the last Krell shipyard in Sector 12. It was massive, a construction facility that had been building warships for the Dominion for 2 centuries. Now hung in space, abandoned, its workers having fled days ago. Target locked, her weapons officer reported. Fire, Sora commanded. The shipyard was reduced to atoms. Massive plasma lances cut through it like a cutting torch through ice. When the firing stopped, there was nothing left but gas and radiation. Sector 12 complete. Sora reported to Fleet Command. All Krell military assets eliminated. Across all 12 battle groups. Similar reports came in. Sector 1 complete. Sector 7 complete. Sector 4 complete. One by one, the battle groups checked off their assignments. 23 days after going silent, humanity had erased the Krell Dominion's military from existence. Not conquered, not occupied. Erased. 45 days after Proxima Colony burned, Earth's communication channels reopened. There was no announcement, no grand declaration. The radio signals simply returned. The diplomatic frequencies came back online. Human embassies began responding to messages again. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and humanity had decided to rejoin the galaxy. Ambassador Nari walked back into the Galactic Council chamber, wearing the same diplomatic uniform she had worn before. Her hair was neatly styled. Her shoes were polished. She carried her tablet with the same efficiency she always had. She smiled at familiar faces, waved a colleague she had known for years, and took her seat as if nothing unusual had happened. Nari, a Velan counselor, approached her cautiously. It's good to see you back. We were concerned. Thank you for your concern, Nari replied warmly, pulling up files on her tablet. I apologize for the communication disruption. It was necessary. Now, shall we discuss the trade agreement revisions from last month? I believe we were making good progress before the interruption. The Velan counselor stared at her, unsure how to respond. Before the interruption? Humanity had just systematically destroyed the most powerful military in the galaxy, and she was talking about trade agreements? Throughout the day, Nari greeted colleagues warmly, discussed pending legislation, reviewed economic reports. She participated in committee meetings about agricultural standards and shipping regulations. She laughed at appropriate moments during informal conversations. She was perfectly, unnervingly normal. In the corner of the chamber sat the new Krell delegate. He was young, barely 30, representing what remained of his fractured people. The Krell Dominion no longer existed as a unified government. Their worlds had splintered into independent systems, each desperately trying to rebuild. The delegate kept his eyes down, afraid to make eye contact with anyone, especially the humans. 2 days after the council reconvened, the Pylar counselor decided someone needed to address what had happened. He stood during open forum, clearing his throat nervously. Regarding the recent incident, he began carefully, choosing each word like stepping through a minefield. The Krell situation. Perhaps we should discuss. The Krell Dominion attacked our civilians without provocation. Nari interrupted, her tone still pleasant and professional. They murdered 40 million human beings in an act of terrorism designed to intimidate us into surrender. We responded proportionally by eliminating their military capacity to repeat such actions. Is there something unclear about our position? Proportionally, the counselor sputtered, his voice rising. You destroyed their entire military. Every ship, every base, every... Yes. Nari agreed calmly, as if discussing weather patterns. Proportional to ensure that 40 million of our citizens would never be murdered again. We eliminated the threat completely so it could never resurface. The matter is now closed. Unless you believe genocide against human civilians should be met with a lesser response. The chamber fell silent. No one knew what to say. Nari smiled politely and returned to reviewing her tablet. Over the following weeks, intelligence reports flooded the Galactic Council. The galaxy discovered something remarkable and terrifying. Humanity hadn't occupied a single Krell world. They hadn't claimed any territory. They hadn't installed puppet governments or demanded reparations. They had simply, efficiently, removed the threat. Every military installation had been destroyed. Every warship eliminated. Every weapons factory reduced to rubble. Then humanity had returned home. As if completing a checklist, the Krell civilians were left alone. Their cities were untouched. Their agricultural worlds continued farming. Their trading stations remained operational. Humanity had surgically removed only the military capacity to wage war, leaving everything else intact. A new term entered every diplomatic text across the galaxy: Terran silence. It became shorthand for something so terrifying that even hardened military commanders spoke it in whispers. Trade agreements began including specific clauses about civilian protection. New treaties contained explicit language prohibiting attacks on non-combatants, with humanity's response to violations spelled out clearly. Military academies across the galaxy began teaching entire courses on human warfare doctrine. Students studied the Krell War as a case study in what happened when you push humanity too far. The phrase, "never make Earth go silent," became common wisdom, repeated in officer training programs and diplomatic schools throughout known space. Jay, the elderly Thrain ambassador who had tried to warn everyone, gave one final interview before retiring. He sat in his quarters, looking tired but relieved. "Most species go to war with emotion," he explained to the interviewer. "Rage, fear, desperation, these drive military action. It makes warfare chaotic, unpredictable, driven by passion." He paused, his forearms gesturing slowly. Humans are different. When they truly commit to war, when they invoke that protocol, they go cold, silent. All emotion drains away, and they become calculating machines. They turn war into mathematics, into a problem that needs solving, and they solve it completely, methodically, with no hesitation. The interviewer asked, "Should the galaxy fear humanity?" "No," Jay replied thoughtfully. "Humanity genuinely prefers peace. They're wonderful trading partners, brilliant scientists, creative artists. But the galaxy should remember that their peace is a choice, not a limitation. And if you take that choice away by murdering their families..." He shook his head. "Don't take that choice away." On Earth, President Day stood before the memorial being constructed on the rebuilt Proxima Colony. The settlement had been restored, new domes rising where old ones had melted. But at its center stood a massive black wall. 40 million names would be carved into its surface. Every single person who had died that day. Children played in the park nearby, laughing and chasing each other under artificial sunlight. They were too young to understand what the memorial meant, too young to remember the darkness that had descended after the attack. They just knew the black wall was important, that their parents sometimes stood before it and cried quietly. Above them, in orbit, Fleet Admiral Jinho reviewed the new fleet from his command ship. The vessels built during the silence hadn't been scrapped. They remained stationed at every human border, sleek warships that served as silent sentinels, museums and monuments to what humanity could become when forced. A young officer approached him on the observation deck, looking up at Earth below. "Sir, do you think we'll ever need the silent protocol again?" Jinho watched her spinning slowly, blue and green and beautiful. "Peaceful. Home. I hope not," he said quietly. "We always prefer peace. Diplomacy. Cooperation. Building things instead of destroying them. That's who we want to be." He turned to face the young officer. "But if another species forces us to answer with silence, if they murder our people and think we'll simply accept it..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The fleet spoke for itself. The Krell's fate spoke for itself. The memorial below spoke for itself. Humanity would always choose peace first. But if you took that choice away, if you murder their innocent, if you force them into silence, the galaxy would learn the same lesson the Krell had learned. And that lesson was carved into 40 million names on a black wall, written in the wreckage of military that no longer existed, spoken in the fearful whispers of every species that had witnessed what happened when Earth went silent. The galaxy would never make that mistake again.